Rick Mears attempts to pass as leader Gordon Johncock takes the white flag in 1982. It was anybody's race. Fighting handling problems, Johncock manages to hold off a last-second charge and win the closest race in Indianapolis history. Hello, I'm Paul Page. Gordon Johncock's car number 20 was a familiar sight at Indy in the 70s and early 80s. It was always fast. But if a two-time Indy winner could be called unlucky, Gordy would be the one. In 1973, he won the rain-shortened, disaster-marred race. And shortly after his thrilling 82 win, personal tragedy would cut short the celebration. Through it all, Gordon Johncock remained professional in victory and gracious in defeat. He became a legend at the Indy 500. On a rainy day in Hastings, Michigan, two-time Indianapolis winner Gordon Johncock goes about his business. Far away from the hectic pace of IndyCar racing, Johncock enjoys working in the quiet seclusion of his 160-acre farm. It's the perfect refuge for a driver who never was comfortable in the limelight.
When I got done with racing, I was ready to get on an airplane and come home and go about my business, you know. I had other things I was doing, and I really didn't care to travel, you know. I guess I've kind of lived out of a suitcase since I was 18 years old, packing and unpacking and moving from one motel to another. And I got enough of it racing, not being on the circuit of giving talks and doing all that. It's something I did not enjoy.
A Michigan native, Johncock began his career driving modified races throughout the Midwest. Shortly after moving up to sprint cars, Johncock's sponsors bought a roadster for him to drive at Indy in 1965. He was 28 years old. With most teams switching to rear-engine cars, Johncock was one of the only 6 front-engine roadsters in the race. He qualified 14th and finished the race in 5th place, 2 spots behind the Rookie of the Year, Mario Andretti, and 4 ahead of fellow rookie Al Unser. Coming back to Indy in 1966, Gordon Johncock had tasted victory at Milwaukee and was ready to make a serious run for the checkered flag. He started from the outside of the second row, but was quickly involved in a massive pileup.
Gordon Johncock was driving a rear-engine car that had a 2-speed Halabrand rear engine. Mario Andretti, I think, was on the pole. And he had it kind of in his mind that he was going to win the battle for the start. And we came around fairly fast, and I had to shift into a higher gear. And so did Gordon Johncock. And he had shifted, of course, with only 2-speed rear end or 2-speed transmission, he really was kind of in a bind.
At the same time, Billy Foster was storming up from the 4th row.
He had a 5-speed transmission, and he was really working his way up through the pack in a hurry. And he tried to squeeze between me and another car and went over my left front wheel and hit the wall. And then that's when everybody started going every which way.
Fortunately, no one was injured in the melee, but 11 cars were eliminated. 5 cars, including Johncock's, were damaged, but able to rejoin the race. At that time, repairs were not allowed during red flag periods. So by the time Johncock was back on the track, he was nearly 3 minutes behind the leaders. When the race was over, Gordy had run the 500 miles faster than the winner, Graham Hill. Johncock finished 4th. Due to the enormous expenses involved, Gordy's sponsors pulled out before the 67 race. But Goodyear came through, setting up the Johncock racing team. Johncock then asked Kalamazoo, Michigan businessman Jim Gilmore to help sponsor the team.
And I looked at Gordy and I said, my golly, I know your name from the dirt car races around here and the other races that he was in throughout Michigan, because I'd always follow them in the paper. Gordy and I started talking about it. He said, well, you drive up to Hastings and see our shop, our garage. So I did so and looked it all over and saw what they were building, and that was the beginning of Gordy's and my relationship.
Starting from the outside of the front row, Johncock ran well, but nobody could touch Parnelli Jones in the STP turbine. Gordy was in the top 10 when a punctured tire caused him to crash on his 188th lap. A.J. Foyt went on to win after Parnelli dropped out. The next 3 years were tough for Johncock Racing. 5th spot was his best start. He did not finish any of those races. Johncock was successful at other tracks, but Indianapolis was another story. At the end of 1970, Johncock Racing dissolved, and Gordy stepped into a 1-year-old McLaren for the 71 race. On the 12th lap of the race, he was involved in a nasty accident.
Steve Krisloff blew an engine, I believe, going in turn 3. Mal Kenyon came along and spun in the oil. I went over the top of him and ended up sideways in the groove, and Mario Andretti came along and hit me broadside. I can remember I got criticized pretty heavily for getting in this accident after the yellow was on and everything, for what I did. But the rest of them that came along and spun afterwards too and everything never got the static that I got for some reason. I don't know why. I guess maybe I was easy to pick on or something, whatever. But we were all pretty lucky in that accident.
As an official member of the McLaren team in 1972, Johncock blew 6 engines before qualifying on the last day. He started 26th. At 110 laps, Gordy had charged up to 3rd place, but retired 3 laps later. At this point in his career, Johncock looked more like a hard-luck loser than a legend, and his shy demeanor didn't set well with the media.
If I got upset every time that something bad was printed about me, I'd probably been upset quite a lot. But I just kind of went out about my business, and probably a lot of the articles I never read as far as that goes. I had people tell me about it, and other people I think really got more upset about it than I did.
Gordy never would become a darling of the media, but his racing luck would change. In 1973, Gordon Johncock stepped into Pat Patrick's STP car number 20. It was an association that would last for 11 years. The first was probably the toughest. Rain on race day forced a delayed start. When the green flag came down, Salt Walther tangled with another car, causing a massive 12-car accident. It was the only driver injured, suffering severe burns to his hands. And before the track could be cleared, it began to rain again. The race was postponed. Another day was lost because of rain. And when the race finally began on the 3rd day, Johncock was ready.
I've often had people ask me, even other sports people, say, how do you get yourself psyched up to run the race? And I said, what do you mean? You know, what do you mean get yourself psyched up to run a race? I don't have to get myself psyched up to run a race. You just go out, you put on your uniform and your helmet, and you go out and you get in a race car, and it's part of your job, you go to work. You know, I don't even know what they're really talking about when they say, how do you get yourself psyched up to get in a race?
By the 25th lap, 7 cars had dropped out, and Johncock had moved from the 4 to the front of the pack. On lap 40, Gordy took the lead, but was soon passed by teammate Swede Savage. Savage held on to first until pitting on lap 54. 5 laps later, with his car understeering badly, Savage spun off of turn 4, hit the inside wall, and cartwheeled down the main straight as the car disintegrated. Savage died 33 days. When the race resumed, Al Unser took the lead, but gave it to Johncock on lap 73 shortly before dropping out. Gordy led the rest of the way. On lap 133, the race was stopped again because of rain. Gordon Johncock was declared the winner.
I don't think, you know, winning the race in 73 was really that exciting to me. For the things that did happen and the delay of the race, as long as it took, most of the people were gone. We had been through so many days of trying to get the race over with, and I think it was just, like I said earlier, something that everybody wanted to get done with and go home, because there'd been so many accidents, there'd been so much rain delay, and everybody was tired.
Johncock had the dubious distinction of winning in a year that most people would just as soon forget.
I could run with anybody on the racetrack that day and had led more laps than anybody else had. And like I say, it just wasn't a situation where we happened to be there in position and won a race. We had won races before that. We were capable of winning races, and it's the way it happened.
Gordon Johncock ran with the Patrick Racing Team in 1974 and ran strong. Despite having his car impounded briefly in a dispute over the turbocharger, Johncock qualified for the inside of the second row. Starting the race fourth, Gordy held his position. He finished fourth as Johnny Rutherford came from the 27th spot to capture the checkered flag. In 1975, he was quick again. This time, he started from the middle of the front row between A.J. Foyt and Bobby Unser. Getting the jump on two of Indy's finest drivers, Johncock took the early lead. Posted the fastest time of the day on lap. Led the first 8 laps, but dropped out on lap 11 with a broken gear. Bobby Unser went on to win the rain-shortened race. Following the disappointment of the year before, Johncock came back in 1976 to sit in the middle of the first row again, this time between Johnny Rutherford and Tom Sneva. On lap 20, Gordy was in the lead. He hung on for 18 laps. Though he never led again, Johncock remained competitive. Just after the halfway point, the race was stopped because of rain. Rutherford was leading and declared the winner, with Johncock third. It was the shortest race in 500 history, and Gordy was still looking to prove he could win, going the distance.
I never felt that I'd prove anything to anyone, that I could go back and win a full 500 miles, because there wasn't too often that we weren't competitive during the race and was not capable of winning the race at any time.
1977 looked like the year that he would go the distance. Starting fifth, Johncock was up to second by the 10-lap mark. Soon he was leading. As the halfway point approached, Gordy was clearly in control. He pulled ahead for what would be 83 straight laps in the lead. With a sizable cushion on A.J. Foyt, Johncock stopped for fuel at 180 laps. As he left the pits, his engine was over-revving severely. Back in the lead, on lap 104, Johncock slowed considerably coming out of turn 4. He coasted down the main straight and pulled off the track inside turn 1.
I guess that's probably the one race that I was the most disappointed ever in, of falling out, because the race most of the day was between Foyt and myself. I think my engine blew with 16 laps to go, and I had about a 13-second lead on AJ at that time when my engine blew coming down the front straightaway. And I just pulled off in turn 1 on the grass, got out of the car and went down and laid in the creek.
Disappointed again, Gordon Johncock would be back. In 1978, Gordon Johncock was in his 6th year at Patrick Racing.
Gordy had a pretty aggressive driving style, and Gordy always believed that it caused him to crash a time or 2 during the year, which we could pretty much count on him to do at least 2 a year. But he was always trying, so that didn't bother us too much. But he told me that he believed that when he came up on another car and the driver in that other car ahead of him saw 20 in his mirror, that he wanted that guy to think, here comes that crazy son of so-and-so, and pull over and get out of his way. And that's how he drove in traffic. I don't think I've ever, to this day, seen another driver that, when his car is handling well, worked traffic or got through traffic better than Gordon Johncock. I think Gordon Johncock was the best that I've ever seen at getting through traffic.
Starting sixth, Johncock ran a strong race. Taking a one-lap penalty for a pit violation, Gordy finished third, 1 lap behind winner Al Unser.
Gordy, you just have to close your eyes and hope that he's pointed the right direction. He's a talented race car driver, but we always said, you know, that if it comes down to the last lap, you better hold on, because Gordy's going to go through you or around you some way to race. He's one that we never did say he feathered the throttle. He always held her wide open and pushed on the brake, and very little on the brake. But he's good.
Lost in the controversy surrounding Bobby Unser's 1981 win over Mario Andretti was the fact that Gordon Johncock looked like a sure bet for second place.
Bobby had his car that day, but Mario and I were fairly close to him.
The race itself was marred by accidents and subsequent caution periods. While entering the track under a yellow flag, Bobby Unser passed several cars before merging with traffic, causing a controversy that was not settled until October of that year. Johncock, who had led 6 times for a total of 52 laps, was running second to Unser, 194th lap, when his engine blew.
There was a lot of things happened at Indianapolis that shouldn't happen. You know, a rule should be a rule. You know, he was the fastest car all day. You know, he was really quite a lot faster than we were, and was the fastest car, and things like that weren't necessary. You know, I don't know why really you want to take a chance like that when you do have the fast car and know you can get by your competitors. Why you want to take a chance like that in pass cars when you know that it's illegal.
Starting from the middle of the second row, Gordon Johncock just missed disaster at the beginning of the 1982 race. Coming down for the start, Kevin Cogan swerved from the middle of the front row, spun across in front of Johncock, and T-boned Gordy's teammate, Mario. On the restart, Johncock moved into third. Though he stayed close to the front, he was struggling.
Rick almost lapped me. If it hadn't been for a yellow the first part of the race, Rick lapped me. My car was handling terrible. But as the race went on and we made adjustments, George HUENING made some adjustments on the car, and we talked over the radio about what the car was doing, you know, and he would make the adjustments on the car when he come in, and about the 155th lap, I was the fastest car on the racetrack.
You know, with about 4 laps to go, I knew I had him. You know, I mean, I knew I could catch him. I didn't know I had him. I knew I could catch him. I knew I was close enough to him. I would catch him before we get to start-finish line, you know, for the checkered flag.
When rookie Danny Sullivan crashed on lap 154, Johncock was running second to MEARS. On lap 159, the green flag came out, and Johncock outraced MEARS into turn 1 for the lead. Johncock held on to the lead, and on lap 183 stretched his advantage when MEARS and Herm Johnson came together in the pits. Taking a full load of fuel, MEARS was back out in 19 seconds. 3 laps later, Johncock made his final stop, taking only enough fuel to finish the race. His stop was 13 seconds, and by lap 188, he held an 11-second lead over MEARS. But Johncock had handling problems. MEARS was gaining quickly.
Each lap, it kept getting worse and worse and worse. I just kept pushing more and more and more to where I had to get out of it more and more on each corner. Why that Rick was able to catch me a second to a lap.
He was getting a little worse each lap, and, you know, tires, he had run the tires off of it. It was pushing real bad, and he was having to run it down on the apron, and it was getting worse every corner. I could see it, and that's why I was able, another reason I was able to reel in toward the end as quick as we did.
By lap 198, Gordy's lead was less than a second.
He could stay on it and get a run at me, coming through turn 3 and shoot and maybe get underneath me coming off in 4.
And as the white flag came out, Mears pulled to the inside. He was even with Johncock going into turn 1, but had to back off.
He didn't cut me off. He had the corner. He had a nose ahead. He had the line. And I just didn't get far enough beside him.
Mears dropped back, but was able to make a final charge at Johncock, coming down for the checker. He dove underneath Gordy at the flag and fell short. Johncock won the race by 16 thousandths of a second. It was the closest margin of victory ever at Indianapolis. The celebration was cut short.
After it got quieted down a little bit, I got in Patrick's airplane and flew up here to Michigan to see my mother because she was in very bad shape, and it was foggy that night and we couldn't land here in Hastings, and we had to land at a city a ways away, and my sister came and picked me up, and I came to the hospital to see my mother, and she really didn't know at that time who I was or really what had happened. And we flew back to Indianapolis because I had to be back the next morning, I think at 6 o'clock to be on TV at the racetrack. And then we had, I remember going that day and getting some new clothes and everything for the victory banquet. And we had the victory banquet that night, and I think it was at 10:22 that night when I was on the stage at the victory banquet that my mother died. And so really it wasn't too pleasant for me for the next 3 or 4 days after I won the race because of that happening.
Following 2 relatively off years for the 2-time Indy winner, Johncock came to practice in 1985 with renewed life. He ran some of the hottest practice laps. But the day before qualifications, Gordon Johncock announced his retirement.
I would say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made in my life, was retiring at that point. But I was just, I guess I was kind of fed up with everything, the way it was happening and taking place. And we were running fairly well, but we had problems, and I wasn't happy with the situation, and I guess I thought maybe that was the easiest way out of it, and so I just decided to quit.
Not satisfied with his retirement from auto racing, Gordon Johncock was back at the track in 1987 in search of victory number 3.
I've always often said that I'm going to be the oldest car driver to ever run at Indianapolis, and I still might be.
First days at Indianapolis, Gordon Johncock was known as a hard charger, but his quiet, businesslike manner was often misinterpreted.
Gordy is definitely misunderstood. There's no doubt about that. He is, people over the years, many people have told me that they don't like Gordon Johncock because he's so arrogant, and he's stuck and he's this and he's that, and that there's nothing farther from the truth. He's the typical guy that's quiet. If you don't know him, he doesn't say much. He many times won't sign autographs, and you can believe me or you won't believe me, but I know this for the fact. He is embarrassed to do that sort of thing.
At a race where few have won, and fewer still have become legends, Gordon Johncock twice rolled into victory lane and into history at the Indy 500. A race for heroes.